especially honored tonight to welcome Dave Oliphant. Dave is a distinguished Texas author, a poet, a publisher, and jazz historian. His writing has helped document and interpret Texas jazz history, including the musicians in the cities and the communities, and the cultural traditions that shape this music. So Dan has written extensively about Texas jazz and is an important voice in helping people understand the deeper cultural story behind the music. And I've asked Dave to say a few words about Eddie and Texas jazz history, so please welcome Dave Oliphant.
In 1969, I was teaching English at a junior college in Hobbs in southern New Mexico, when one day I thought to myself that I should approach the lone record store in that oil town about placing on consignment some recordings of jazz. I wanted to make them available to students, like the ones in a band that a fellow trumpet player and I had put together from a small pool of local musicians. The store owner accepted my proposal, and so I drove to Dallas and bought from a distributor there 25 jazz recordings, mostly from the RCA Victor Vintage series. Some of the records did sell, but happily not the one entitled Count Basie and the Great Benny Moten Band of 1930 to 32, which I had never heard. Had that recording sold, I probably would never have written my book, Texan Jazz, on the place of Texans in jazz history. Fast forward 20 years to 1989, when a friend of mine from my UT student days, who was then teaching high school in Conroe, Texas, contacted me to ask if I would talk to his students who were participating in a competitive program called the Academic Decathlon. The students would be tested in many fields and areas, and for that year's competition, the subject of jazz was one of the topics. I gladly drove to Conroe and talked with the students. The subject of jazz, after having asked Bill, my friend, what he thought about my idea that I would limit the talk to Texas jazz musicians, since I had realized that I could cover all the major movements in jazz history just by focusing on a handful of Texans. My idea was fine with Bill, and so as a result of my hearing the unsold recording and my talk with the students, I would write in 1993 for the Southwestern Historical Quarterly an article on Eddie Durham of San Marcos entitled Eddie Durham and the Texas Contribution to Jazz History. Subsequently, in 1996, the University of Texas Press would publish my book, Texan Jazz. My point in all of this is that from having discovered Eddie Durham's central position in jazz history through his presence on the Count Basie Benny Moten recording of 1930 to 32, I had stumbled upon the importance of Texas jazz musicians in every era of the music. I learned of Durham's earlier membership in the Blue Devils band of the late 1920s and in the Jimmy Lunsford and Glenn Miller orchestras of the 1930s. His composing and arranging of key riff-oriented tunes like Swinging the Blues, the very epitome of swing. His being a virtuoso on the trombone, his introducing into jazz of the amplified guitar, and his having influenced the great bebop guitarist Charlie Christian. Other Texans included in my historical survey are Jack Teagarden of Garland, Kenny Dorham of Fairfield on Posto, Red Garland and Jimmy Jufrey of Dallas, and Arnett Coleman of Fort Worth, representing respectively the periods of hot jazz and swing, bebop and hard bop, cool and third string jazz, and free or harmonic jazz. But from the beginning, it was Eddie Durham who inspired my writings on jazz and made them possible, as did the basic Moten recording of 1932 that, lucky for me, no one in Hobbs, New Mexico had purchased before I retrieved it from Mike's record rack 57 years ago.